We lost the PowerPoint. I don't know if that matters.
Yes, I accidentally hit stop share. Okay. We are now broadcasting live.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Willmer. I'm a graduate brother from the University of Akron. Happy Founders Day. We appreciate you joining us today when we're going to do a session on finding a job in a remote world. But further, I think it's important to tell you a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I'm a Alpha Omicron grad, class of '92. After that, I served the better part of 6 years on working on the Phi Gamma Delta staff, 2 of those as a field secretary, and the rest of that time working as the director of programs. I guess the highlight I would say was lucky enough to be part of the 150th anniversary in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the 150th Ecclesia. Since that time, since leaving staff in '98, I've been working for a company that's called Robert Half. And I've been here 22 years. We primarily specialize in accounting and finance, but we also have other specialties such as information technology, legal, creative, marketing, and of course, office administration. We do a combination of consulting work, mostly through our wholly owned subsidiary, Protiviti, for those of you that follow that world. But for the most part, we do staffing. And that includes full-time staffing, full-time placement, as well as temporary or consulting, if you will, in those fields or those areas that I covered. I am currently the Senior District Director based in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm pleased to cover some material with you today at a unprecedented time. I think we've been using that word a lot, unprecedented time, especially when you're looking to find work. And my guess is some of you joined that you've got some questions related to that. Maybe you're a recent grad that is going through your virtual graduation at your university. Some of you may be freshmen that are just starting your college career. Some of you may be graduate brothers that are in a transition or looking for a new opportunity. I say welcome to you all, and hopefully the material that we cover today will be very helpful. But as I mentioned, you maybe have some questions related to how to find a job or maybe some career advice. And I would say as we go throughout, please jot down your questions. We've got Alex Cruz, who's manning the fort, if you will. If you've got questions, tab those in, text those in, and we'll cover those as we get to the end of the presentation and go through that. And then we'll have an open forum. Probably got about a half hour worth of material, maybe not even that long. And then the rest will be for Q&A. So let's get started. I think a lot of you may be asking, are people still hiring? The answer is absolutely. As I mentioned that we're in Ohio right now, and or I am in Ohio, and Ohio is getting ready to open up, as many other states are. You may be living in a southern state or some of the other areas where you've been open the entire time. So it's hard to translate and give you a one answer for everybody, but our company's still hiring. The answer is absolutely. Now, having said that, are they going through the same model? No. They're going through a lot different models in terms by which they do that, and some things that were not important a couple months ago are really important now. Some things that have always been important continue to be important, but there's some nuances with this, especially as we get into a remote hiring environment. I think it's also important from a job search standpoint. If you read the news, you can get a little depressed. 30 million people have applied for unemployment in the last 6 weeks. That's a big number. That's a monumental number. That's a historic number. But I think it's important as you kind of go into this and you kind of follow. I'm not an economist, but as I'm in the hiring game, if you will. And as you look at this particular downturn, although historic, it was government triggered. It was triggered by a government shutdown related to public health. Said differently, it is not an economic downturn, meaning it wasn't triggered by a bank or a financial fallout. It wasn't triggered by some event related to the stock market or anything like that. Our banks are healthy. The financial health of the economy was healthy going into March, and unemployment was at a 50-year low, a historic low. Now at a historic high, it was a historic low, and again, all triggered by a decision versus a series of events. So I would say I'm not an economist, but we believe we're optimistic and have reason to be optimistic, not to mention from what the government is doing as far as helping people find jobs and helping with unemployment, everything that is out there. You'd like to think that this is going to be more of a V or a small U-shaped in terms of that. Again, we don't know, but there's reason to be optimistic that there is hiring today, and there will continue to be even more hiring as we move forward. So what we're going to talk about are, and this is, things that you would think we would talk about is, resume writing, interviewing. We're going to talk a little bit about, social media and how to present yourself. But what we're going to talk about is the changes and the differences between today and maybe 3 or 4 months ago. I'm sure all of you have taken classes or skills and know a little bit about how to write a resume and how to interview. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but for the most part, I think we got an idea in terms of how that looks, especially being part of the fraternity and being through the recruitment cycle. You get an idea in terms of how it is to be selected in an organization. And although there is some big differences between being selected into a fraternity and getting hired on, I think some of the process that you go through can be very relatable in terms of how to present yourself, your brand, if you will, what you're looking for, what they are looking for. Those are all things that transpire. So it's important to go through that. And we'll cover all that, I guess, for the most part in this presentation related to resume all the way to offer. So you may be asking yourself what type of jobs that we should be looking for, and what is the biggest change right now? What is the actual curveball by which you're being thrown? I think the key thing in the job search process is, one, we often encourage networking, where you actually can go out and network. You can do social networking, but you can go out and do networking. Well, that's kind of tough now with social distancing. There isn't necessarily those events that take place. Probably we can argue in the job search, the most important event, if you will, is the actual interview. Not a lot of companies, and very few companies, in fact, are doing in-person interviews. They're doing, frankly, what we're doing right now, probably some type of Microsoft Teams or Skype, or maybe relying on just a good old-fashioned phone. But the face-to-face interview, where you're able to mirror and match and sense body language and tone and emotion and things like that nature, gets a little tough when you're doing virtually. So those are things that you got to take in consideration as you go through. Plus, when you're doing it remote, you're relying heavily on technology and the tools that you've got in front of you. The same way that you're viewing me today, that technology becomes very important in terms of the tools that you use and making sure that you've got the right tools to, in fact, be doing a job search in today's environment. So as you begin your job hunt, know that those are the kind of the key differences, is that we're working in a virtual environment. As we move forward with the phases of the hiring, old school hiring would be, you would submit a resume to somebody, you would find out about a job opportunity, you would submit a resume, you'd have a phone screen, you would do maybe 1 to 3 interviews in person. Maybe that included a lunch interview. Most of those probably on site at the company, and then you went through an offer. Now, some of those aspects still hold true. We're probably going to still submit a resume, probably still going to have a phone screen, but the key mechanism of the actual hiring is that interview will now be, and it may be 1 or 3 different sessions that you have. Those will all now be virtual. And those can range anywhere from one-on-one, where you're just meeting one person, but a lot of companies do, and we're doing group interviews where there'll be 3 or 4 people in the room. Well, they'll still do that, but now we'll be on a Teams environment or Skype environment, Zoom like we're doing right now. And it gets a little different as you see all the different nuances of the different camera angles that you have versus all sitting together at a conference room. So how quickly that's changed, and how quickly you need to adapt to that in terms of that stylistic and preparing for that. So let's go into the job search itself. I think it includes, and it's important now, and another change is, although we're going back to work, I think you need to be prepared that things will not be going back to normal over the next 30 days. Depending on the articles that you read, this could go 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months related to that. Again, I'm not in public health, but the media of going back to the way it was will not happen. And so why that's important is this will not just affect your job search, it also will affect your job and what you do and how you do it. So as you're going through the job searches, now this may vary. If you're an accountant, it will be different than if you're going to be a veterinarian. It'll be a lot different if you're going to be a doctor, and it'll be a lot different if you're going to be an attorney. So I'm speaking in general terms. But most of the jobs that we have when we graduate from college, we can consider, you know, they'll be non-manual labor. They'll be considered more in the business space, if you will. You've got to look at it, what jobs will be flexible in themselves, meaning will you be able to work virtually once you obtain that job? Chances are, if you're able to work virtual or at least have flex hours, there'll be a better chance of that job being around over the next few years and being essential, if you will. And so in having that flexibility, you got to keep that in mind as far as maybe some of the traditional jobs that are not flexible out there. You may take that consideration in your job search if you're able. Now, obviously, if you're going to be a doctor, there's obviously no flexibility of that. That's probably not going to change dramatically too much as you move forward. But in the business space, be looking for companies that are flexible, be looking for positions that are flexible, whether it's related to being able to work virtually or at least have flexible hours. And there's a lot of different tools out there by which you can do some searches on. I've given you 3 of them. Flex Jobs is exactly what it sounds like. There's a flexible schedule and a flexible work list. And 2 are relatively new, something called Remotive and Angel List. Again, they post things that are more flexible in nature, virtual nature, and frankly, these were happening before COVID. So these are 3 resources that you can use. But the important thing is, as you're going through your job search, not only is the process going to be virtual, but the job itself needs to be flexible and have the ability to be virtual as you go through that. Let's talk about networking. As we mentioned, a good old-fashioned networking event probably doesn't exist right now, where you show up and you're able to shake hands, exchange business cards, and meet a lot of really cool people that can help you with your search. So things like conferences and things of that nature really non-existent right now. So you're going to have to rely on your social networking. And so let's start step 1. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, get one. Set that up. And when you're in a LinkedIn profile, it's kind of like being in the fraternity. We want you active. So not only should you just be having a profile and linking in with people, you should be liking articles. You should be posting articles. You should be liking people and sharing other articles that other people share that are within your network. So similar to our fraternity experience, this isn't just about being a member, it's what you put into it. So when you're in LinkedIn, obviously have a nice profile picture, something that's professional. Of all the social media outlets, LinkedIn is considered the most professional in terms of helping you with your job search. And that goes for a recent grad all the way up to, you know, getting ready to retire. But be active on it in terms of postings, articles, and things of that nature. You can also, too, for some of your mentors that are out there, asking them to quote unquote endorse you as far as the skills. So if you're going to get into sales, ask them to endorse you for sales type skills, public speaking, things of that nature. There's a whole host of things that they can endorse you on and skills within LinkedIn that'll be helpful. They can also put some quotes in terms of working with you and various things to help you through. But be active on LinkedIn. Not just with connecting with people. Obviously, we want you to connect with people, but you can also do some researching there as far as some various industries. But the important thing is be active. Make sure that you know that it is professional. LinkedIn is not Facebook. It's not Instagram. You should not be having pictures on there from Fiji Island. You should not be having pictures on there that are more social in nature. Again, it's considered a professional network. And we'll get to later is employers will research pretty heavily your background online, starting with LinkedIn. And so make sure you have a professional approach to LinkedIn. It's not like Twitter or Snapchat or some of the other ones that are out there, and it's important to know the difference. Make sure that you're, when we're going through the do's and don'ts, make sure that you realize as you go through this, that social media is a history. So anything that you've ever posted, everything that you've ever been part of, anything that you've been attached to will show up online. I can't tell you how many times stories that we hear from clients that somebody goes through, whether it's virtual interview or non-virtual process, that we get down to offer stage, and as clients are going through the final stages of checking references, part of their due diligence is checking your profile online. This is a common practice. And it's not just LinkedIn. They'll go through and they'll Google, they'll go through and show your Facebook, they'll go through and look Instagram, anything that you're attached to that would show up in there, they can find. So make sure that although you may say, oh, I've got a great LinkedIn profile, very professional, and then your Instagram and Facebook shows some things that you're tagged to, or posts or pictures that you're not so proud of, know that that's up for public display. There's no hiding from that, and that will be part of the due diligence as far as getting hired in most companies, if not all companies, in terms of doing that. So make sure that you've got a profile there. So some do's and don'ts. Do have a LinkedIn profile. And I'm not suggesting that you don't have an Instagram or Facebook. In fact, I hope you do and you're very active. But know that your character and your brand is on display and will be judged in an interview process. And it goes back to your freshman year, to high school, all the way back. So make sure that you are aware of that. I would do an audit and an inventory of anywhere that you're present on these social media outlets, including Google, including Twitter. Go back in your history, unattach yourself to any articles or things or photos that you don't want to be associated with. Take down posts that you had previously, and it doesn't matter if you say, well, that was 4 years ago, or that was when I was in high school. Character is a lifelong thing, so make sure that you are aware of that, and make sure from a do standpoint, make sure that you've got things that show your accomplishments, things that you achieved, things that shed some light in terms of all the positive things that you do, all the associations that you're part of. You want to demonstrate those. So this isn't just necessarily don't do these things and try to steer clear. Make social media very a positive aspect, and having that social aspect, being part of the fraternity, being part of associations, being part of successful awards, all those types of things and experiences that you have in Phi Gamma Delta and after, we do want you to have on display as far as social media. So make sure that includes photos, that includes articles, all those positive things. Make sure those are actually up there and endorsed. All right, let's move on to looking at some of the things. Can we move forward if you don't mind? So in terms of having this online portfolio, I think it's important just from a statistical nature. We've done, our company does a lot of analysis in terms of what our clients think that's important. So this aspect of this online display or this online media that you have, please realize about half of our clients that are out there that we survey would say that your online portfolio, if you will, this includes social media, Google searches, all of that is considered a portfolio. That is important, both positive and negative. So realize this aspect that we've been going through isn't just a sidebar and a nice to have. It actually represents quite a big piece of your ability to get hired or to be attracted by, or have a client attracted by your potential. So these do's and don'ts are very important in terms of hiring. It's not necessarily things to stay away from, but also things to do in terms of being very active on. Let's move, Alex, to the next slide as far as specialists. Now, I promise this is not a brand endorsement for Robert Half, but it is okay to seek help out there. There's things like career coaches. Some of those may be from your university that will help you as far as resume writing and some of the career pathing that you're doing. There are specialized agencies. As I mentioned, we happen to be in the accounting and finance area and a couple other areas. But realize there's firms out there, there are companies out there that are willing to help at oftentimes no cost. They actually charge the people that hire you the fee, that they're there to help you as far as your career search. So if you in fact would like to get some help, there are companies out there like mine that are staffing companies that are in business to find people like you and help find a job, and they charge the clients and by which to do that. So you get, look at it this way: it's free advice to get registered or at least have a conversation with these folks. And again, there's specialists in every field. There's companies that specialize in engineering. There's companies that specialize in healthcare. There's companies that specialize in sales. I mentioned my company as far as accounting and finance. Again, you find an area or criteria, there's a specialist that works in the quote unquote staffing arena that can help you with your interviewing, finding opportunities, because Some of these are private searches, meaning they don't post online for the opening. It's a confidential search, meaning there may be somebody in the position right now they're looking to replace. So the last thing they want to do is post the job with somebody in it already, but they're looking to upgrade or go in a different direction. And oftentimes they'll engage a staffing company or an employment firm to do their search for them. And there's a variety of ways by which they do it. So it's okay to ask for help from specialists. And you could do this both on a full-time basis, a temporary basis, or it may even be that you're looking for an internship. All sorts of ways by which they can assist. And that brings me to my next point. As I mentioned earlier, you may be a freshman or a sophomore and you're not ready yet to graduate. Don't overlook the opportunity to do temporary work over the summers, or maybe even while you're going through school, or internships. These are all great ways to build up your portfolio and your experience. I think oftentimes as we go through a search, the most frustrating thing for somebody just graduating and somebody says to them across the table, well, you just need to have experience. And the natural reaction is, well, how do I get that experience? I need you to hire me to get that experience. That's where internships and some of the temporary assignments come in. And I would encourage you, if you can, to maybe look at something in your field where you do that internship or that temporary work. For an example, if you're looking to get in accounting, maybe you do some volunteer work with a nonprofit organization in terms of helping them out with their summer work in the accounting space. And maybe it's not heavy accounting, but maybe you're just helping them keep the books. Maybe you're helping them with maybe some collections. Maybe you're helping with some receivables. And maybe just doing some Excel work for them. Not heavy accounting work, but enough to get your feet wet in terms of some experience. That's something you can talk to later on. So volunteer work, internships, temporary help, those are all things I would encourage you to do it within your field. An example, if you want to be a veterinarian and you're going through college, you eventually want to go to vet school, maybe you work at a pet store. And you may say, well, that's a lot different than being a veterinarian. Yes, but it shows interest in that particular field. It shows dedication, it shows commitment in that area, not to mention a little bit of experience around the industry. All right, let's get to resume writing. I'm sure many of you have taken a crack at doing a resume at one point, or maybe you haven't. Let's talk about a couple things. Now, matter of opinion, just a person that's been around the industry, resume should be one page. Think of it this way. Most of this is online now. There's really no such thing as a paper resume unless you're going to have one of the few in-person interviews that are going on right now, but that's going to be far and remote. So you got to think of what's going to show up on a screen. You don't want people leafing through. You want everything that's on that screenshot on the one time right there in front of you. You don't want them to have to scroll through. So matter of opinion, resume should be one page, especially if you're a recent grad or in college. There's probably not a ton you need to do to have 3 or 4 pages. I know there's different schools of thought per industry. I know in the education field, it's okay to have 2 or 3, and that may be so. But generally speaking, from a business standpoint, one page should do it. Make sure that you're able to show accomplishments that you have. Just telling them what your role was or what you did, just a one-line what you did, probably won't cut it. What you want to have is have accomplishments with each one of those, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. But as you go through a resume, the one thing you don't want to do is be dishonest. Don't oversell something. Don't put a title that you weren't. Don't give yourself a promotion. Make sure that, especially if you're in a field that maybe is a little bit more complicated, and there can be some, especially we see this in IT, make sure you have it that's easy to understand and that it's keyword rich. And what we mean by that is keyword rich is when I run a Google search on something that I'm looking through a resume or do some type of search, word search, that those words should appear on your resume. So things like if you're going to be in business development or sales, the word business and development should show up on your resume. As I'm an employer and I'm Googling those types of words, those should show up on the resume and your resume will get pulled up. And finally, customize, make it your own. I know a lot of us maybe take a look at different people's resume and we say, oh, that looks really good. I want mine to look like that. And that's okay. Formatting is okay. But you should never be cutting and pasting from that because that will not stick out for the next time. That's that guy's resume, not yours. So make sure you customize. All right, let's go to the next page. I mentioned this earlier as far as accomplishments. What ROI means, return on investment, is percentages. So an example would be, and I'll use a fraternity example. And let's say you didn't have any experience and you want to put, that your recruitment chair at your fraternity, you don't want to just, or in your chapter, you wouldn't just put recruitment chair. What you would say would be something like, successfully recruited 15 new members, which increased chapter size by 33%. Now I just made those numbers up, but you would need to make sure that those were specific. That's an example in terms of an ROI. Some type of measurable results that usually include some type of stats or statistic that shows improvement or achievement of overall goals. That's overall ROI. And ROI really comes down to two things. Either you increase something or you improved it in terms of cost savings. So that's usually the two things when you think of ROI. So increase chapter size, or if you're a treasurer, reduce expenses by X amount of percentage. Those are two kind of basic examples. Visually appealing. Now be careful with this one. Now you want it to look nice and visually appealing, but at the same time, you don't want to have too many bells and whistles that look like it's something from Hollywood. Now this depends on the field. If you're in the creative space, if you're in the marketing space, you may go a little bit more over the edge into a particular area with your resume, because that's accepted. But if you're in sales, you don't necessarily want to have rainbows and flowers at the top. That doesn't necessarily match up with an accounting job. So make sure that it's industry specific in terms of visually appealing. And again, you can seek some advice and counsel from others on that. But visually appealing just means that it looks professional and it stands out. It doesn't necessarily have to have a lot of bells and whistles unless you're in an industry that calls for that. Here's the thing that's very important. This seems like a basic, but it's a killer. As I mentioned earlier, can't tell you how many times we're in the final stages and we're doing the vetting process as far as online, and something sticks out that just bombs the job. If you want to bomb your resume, have a misspelling or a grammar error. Again, if you want to bomb the resume, spelling error, grammar, kills it every time. You could be the best candidate out there, but if something's spelled wrong, or because the idea is this needs to be, you've had time to work on it. This shouldn't be something you're doing very quickly, that you've given some thought, you've gone through the details, all those types of things. This sends a message to an employer of the type of work that you're going to do. If you're an engineer that's working on building bridges and you can't spell, well, their bridge is probably not going to go off the way they want it to. So you're not going to be the candidate. So make sure that you're error-free, no mistakes. It has to be 100% on that. And best way to do that is proofread it yourself and have 3 or 4 others do the same. Sometimes when you're writing out, you just don't catch your own error. Make sure it's proofread by yourself and at least 3 or 4 other people, that they take a look before you send it out. All right, let's move on to the next step. So you're doing your job search, you identified a job that's remote in nature, you got a great resume, and boom, we got an interview. They're interested in talking with you. Usually the first step is a phone interview. Not always, but the phone interview. And this is kind of a key one. It's your chance to make, after the resume, a first impression. So here's what you need to do if you receive interest from a company. And let's just use an example. Again, here in Ohio, let's just say it's Procter & Gamble, based out of Cincinnati. Do your research on the company. Number one, know the job that you're interviewing for. I know a lot of us, when you're doing side trips, you're not just applying to 1 or 2 jobs. You may apply to 12, 20 jobs at different locations. And you may get interest from somebody and you're not exactly sure exactly the job description of what you actually applied for. Go back, look through very thoroughly the job description. Do research on the company. Know the organizational chart, know the background, know a little bit about the company history. I mentioned Procter & Gamble, know where they're headquartered, know the number of employees, all those basic things that you do. Again, if I had used a fraternity example and you're going through recruitment and somebody, a potential candidate, a recruit is asking you questions about your chapter, you're gonna wanna know the background. If you say things that you don't know, that's not going to go over too well. So know the background of the company that you're researching. Now, you don't have to spend countless hours doing that, but you should be well read and know a little bit about the company, know a lot about the job that they're looking for. And of course, you're going to have clarifying questions you're going to ask, but be prepared. In the phone interview, these first impressions, they're looking for enthusiasm, they're looking for voice inflection, they're looking for you to have questions, to be inquisitive, to be eager, not overly eager, but those are things that they're trying to figure out. They obviously have your resume and your background, so you don't want to be too wordy as you go through. Answer their questions directly, ask for clarification and make sure that those questions go through. But this is your chance from a verbal standpoint to have a first impression, being knowledgeable, being concise, being brief and well-educated, while being inquisitive will go over well. Now let's go through the job interview. This is the one that's via video now. 2 months ago, we spent a lot of time in our business talking about how to look and how to prepare. So let's talk about some keys here. Before you even go through the interview, number one, you got to do a technical evaluation. Make sure you're in a secure area that has great Wi-Fi. What you do not want to be doing is going through this and testing this out 3 minutes beforehand and being really nervous. So as they give you the link, go onto the link early, make sure you got good Wi-Fi connection, make sure you've got a computer that the battery is up and running. All those things technology-wise, you got to make sure you're up and running from a technology standpoint. Also, you can see behind me the background. It's interesting, I can't count how many times, and I got to tell you, in my own company, we've had to call people out. You know, if you've got an unprofessional background, if you know, you don't want a weight bench behind you. If you're sitting in the fraternity house, you don't want to be in the front room with something that looks a little bit funny. You don't want to be sitting out on your patio where trees or out at the pool. You want to be in a place where the background is professional, it's well lit, they can see you, you can see them. You want to make sure your sound's good. I know I look a little funny with my headphones and my my microphone here, but this is how I communicate throughout the day a lot. So this is fine. But making sure that all your technology set, your background set, you're in a comfortable place. There's not dogs and babies crying in the background, that you've got well lit. All the environments are what you'd want in a professional environment. Let's talk about how you dress. So I think there's a natural tendency when you're in a virtual environment that you're probably going to be doing this maybe from your home, your parents' home, an apartment, maybe the fraternity house, where you're going to be doing an environment where you probably feel comfortable. You're used to wearing a certain type of wardrobe. I would strongly encourage you to treat the interview as if you were in person. Again, I'll repeat, treat the interview from a dress standpoint. Treat it like, and I say that for a couple different reasons. When you look the part, you feel the part. So if I'm an attorney and I'm interviewing with a law firm, I want to come off and look as though I look like an attorney and I look like I can put myself in that job. And I also want to have a mental state and feeling that I'm in that space. And if you're dressed in your sweats and a t-shirt, number one, you're not going to come off that professional. Or if you're dressed in even a golf shirt for something that you should be elevated a little bit more, you're not going to feel in that job. You want to put yourself visually in that job, in that company, and you want the people that you're talking to look at you and feel as though that's the person that's going to be in that job. And you do that from the way you dress, both for yourself and for them. So my strong recommendation is don't just do the tie and the shirt at the top. I would go the whole dress, and I say that most importantly from a mental standpoint from you. When you're doing this, I've tried really hard throughout this to look into my camera to maintain eye contact. And I got to tell you, it's tough because you're not in front of me. I'm looking into a camera, and it's tough to maintain that eye contact. But what you'll find, and again, I'm talking to an audience here and I've got a PowerPoint in front of me, but most of the time there'll be the photos or actually the live video. The more that you can be looking right at them with your responses and engaging them interpersonally, again, it's via video, the better off you'll be, versus looking down a lot or looking away. And it's easy to do because you're in a room by yourself, and you kind of don't lose yourself in this. You have to almost put a mental aspect that you're sitting around at a conference table and they're just right there in front of you. So make sure you're maintaining eye contact. Try really hard to maintain eye contact with the person that's asking the question, especially in the group interviews. If there's 3 or 4 people, you'll have different people asking you different questions. When you're addressing that, make sure, like you would if you're in a room, you're addressing that person. You may look around the room, which is be looking around your screen, which is fine as you're giving responses, but make sure you're catching eye contact with that individual and with the entire team. Being engaged in a virtual environment is so important. We've been talking to our teams over and over. This is internally, the people that work for me. We make sure we have our videos on. I've known these people. I've been working with many of them many years. I know exactly what they look like. I know exactly how they dress. But it's important that I see them on these videos from an engagement standpoint. It helps you in terms of what you're trying to communicate. All right, let's avoid some faux pas, if you will. I think most of the faux pas include with being timely. As I mentioned, make sure the technology is ready to go and you're on time. I don't know about you guys, but it just takes me at least 5 minutes on a Zoom call or anything like that to make sure it goes up. I was on this call. I logged on a little earlier. It took longer than I thought. My computer was thinking, and it went a little slower than I thought. And I got on about 12, 15 minutes early. Had I been 2 or 3 minutes early, I would have been really pressing it. So don't press it as far as it goes. So if you have a 1:30, don't log on at 1:28. Log on at 1:20. It's okay if you have to sit there for minutes and minutes. No problem at all. I think it's important that you maintain that. Number 2, and my battery just showed that it was low, by the way. Don't cause a commotion. And what I mean by that is when you're on there, you can be shuffling papers that can, and I'm on a microphone, so you can't hear it too much, but don't shuffle paper, especially if you're on speaker. Don't be making a lot of movements on there because it's on video. It could be a distracting. So causing a commotion in terms of a video, especially when it's group, you want to try to maintain still if you're not speaking or not trying to give demonstration. But if you are just listening, just make sure that you're kind of still in listening mode. Make sure that you turn the mute button off. This happens a lot. It happens a lot in our business where somebody will be talking, and then you'll hear somebody say, Dave, your mute button's on. Make sure you're off mute. Make sure your video is always on. So try not to be clicking too much. I would recommend in this environment, keeping your microphone on and keeping your video on the entire time. That way you're not going back and forth, but making sure you're not muting yourself and going into a great response to a question that you just end up having to repeat yourself. Again, we mentioned earlier, no distractions in background as far as noises, lawnmower, dogs barking in the background. Make sure you avoid the unnecessary noises. I think one thing that people do, now this is probably more in meetings than an interview. I can't picture you multitasking where you would actually be doing something else, but let's just say you shouldn't be checking your email as somebody's talking to you about an interview. You shouldn't be on your phone, looking at something from a text. So I think it goes without saying, but again, don't lose yourself in the environment and making sure you're doing it. So some of the faux pas would be, I would say that obviously when they're asking you questions that you answer it completely, that you don't give you 1 or 2 answers. You want to be engaged and going through that. And too quick to judge. I think this goes from a standpoint of when you're getting feedback from them as far as the job itself, make sure you're going through some of the detail as far as what it looks like and what it sounds like, and be clear, ask clarifying questions and get clarifying questions related to the job itself. All right. So you submitted your resume, you got a great resume, did a phone screen, did a great interview, virtual interview. Now it's time for the job offer. So make sure, and from a salary standpoint, that you've done your homework. Hopefully, when you did research on the job, that you did your homework, and then you know exactly what the job pays and the industry pays. Have a good idea in terms of what you're looking for. I think it gets a little tricky right now with the number of unemployment that's out there. So you may have to be a little bit flexible depending on the city that you're in. So maybe a job that was paying 60,000 2 months ago, you know, maybe you need a little flexible. Maybe you would take 58. I'm not telling you to accept anything that you wouldn't normally, but a flexibility probably on money right now, given the state of employment, wouldn't be a bad idea. Again, know what you're worth and only accept what you're worth, but a little flexibility would go a long way right now. But the most important thing is do research. Again, there's a lot of advice and counsel that you can get out there from the university, and there's companies that can give you advice and counsel, and there's a lot of guides that are out there that will show you some information related to that. Don't be prepared to negotiate. If it's a great position that you love, and let's use the term, you're expecting 58, you think you're worth 58, and they offer you 52, you don't necessarily have to turn it down. Let them know you're very interested, but the salary's a little low. Don't be afraid to negotiate. Negotiation, especially with business opportunities, is not frowned upon. You can't be too drastic in your negotiation. So if you're expecting 58, they offer 52, you shouldn't then ask for 65. Be professional in terms of your negotiation. Again, express interest on that. And there's a way of negotiating that makes them not on the defensive as the client and the offer, and puts you in a position of power and professionalism as you're doing that. So know what you're worth, negotiate professionally, seek guidance and counsel as far as how to do that and what the best way to approach it as. And if you are very interested in a role, let them know you're very interested in a role. You just have some issue with the terms and the conditions by which they're offering you, and you'd like to come somewhere in the middle or come to a acceptable place for that. All right, we're about ready for some Q&A, but before we go into that, as you go into this negotiation, a lot of times you may find that you'll get an offer letter that goes throughout. So I always think it's good to walk through, before you get an offer letter, to walk through any type of salary verbally with somebody. So it's okay to get an idea. If you know you're going to be made an offer and they say, hey, expect an offer from us, it's okay to get an idea of, I know I'll get an offer in writing from you, but tell me a little bit about what you expect the offer to see, or what I should expect from that offer. To get in that conversation sometimes earlier than later may be good, to make sure we're setting expectations related to salary, setting expectation related to benefits. Sometimes in the environment, you won't be afforded that opportunity, but if you're able to have a discussion before the offer letter, that's important. And what that will do is, if you're kind of far off on what you think the job will pay and what they're going to actually pay, it may just come down to demonstrating your value, especially early on when you're a recent graduate. You want to make sure that you're demonstrating to them the value you're going to add and how that pertains to the actual salary by which they're offering. So point being, get into a conversation before you get to an offer letter. If possible, it's good to set the expectation. And I think that's good from a relationship standpoint, especially if this person you're going to be reporting to be very transparent and then to have an upfront approach to how you're going to communicate with one another. The interview and the offer are really the first stages of this relationship that you're going to have with this manager, maybe for a long period of time. So make sure you keep that in mind as you go through this. All right, Alex, go to the next slide. I think we've got it about wrapped up. So in closing, before we go to Q&A, things are a lot different right now. The keys are that we outlined, probably social media and your presence there, doing your homework, whether that be your resume or your online homework as far as the position itself, the company that you're interviewing, the do's and don'ts as far as the virtual interview, whether it be Skype, Zoom, or Microsoft Teams, in terms of going through that. Seek advice and counsel. There's a lot of good companies that are out there to do that. There's a lot of good resources at your university to do that. And I would end with this before we go to Q&A. There's two things I look for when we're hiring. Most of our clients do as well. Number one, can the person do the job? As you go through the background, their skills, and I think that goes without saying. But number one, can they do the job? But number one is, can they do the job? And number two, do they want the job? And you should demonstrate by you wanting the job with your research. You demonstrate the job by your enthusiasm, how you approach, how you dress. But number one and number two, in many cases, are equal. And although many of the positions that you'll be interviewing for and that you're studying for are technical in nature, realize that interpersonal skills and communication is important with any job that you're going to have. So no matter if you scored the best score to have and if you got a 4.0 in school, how you communicate and how you present yourself, no matter what the field, is always going to be important in this search from the start until the end. And not to mention not only getting the job, but being promoted in there, interpersonal skills and how you conduct yourself and look continue to be important through any career that you have, regardless of the field. So with that, Alex, we'll open up the floor. We've got probably about 5 or 10 minutes to field any questions. I'll take any questions that are out there.
All right. So the first question comes from Brother Brent Ellis. He's asking, if you have had a long career in higher education administration, what advice would you give to transitioning to another sector? Any advice about converting a curriculum vitae to a resume?
So it's interesting you bring up higher education. My master's degree is in higher education. So I worked for the fraternity for, I like to say the better part of 6 years, but in between that, I worked at a higher university. I was in higher education. So I think higher education translates into a lot of fields. Example, I think you can easily translate that into a recruiting field. And I know I work for a staffing company, but from a recruiting field, there's a lot of corporate recruiting that goes on out there. So I think corporate recruiting and translating to that would help. I think you can argue that there is a field in nonprofit, not necessarily education, that you can transition to. And then obviously you can get a little bit more poignant and a little bit more specific. It goes throughout. I think the one thing that you want to do when you're making any transition, whether it be higher education to something else or any career transition, you want to do research on the field that you're going into. Don't be too broad and say, well, I'll take anything that's not higher education. Have pinpoint maybe 2 or 3 industries that make sense and that you've done some research on, that makes sense to you and makes sense for them, that the skills translate, that the experience translate. And I would say there's any area that you're in, higher education being this example, there's at least 2 or 3 other industries that make sense for you and for them based upon skill and background, regardless of how long you spent in that industry. I was better part of 6 years in a particular industry. This one struck me as a right one to be aligned to. Now it's sales, if you will, but the recruiting aspect translated pretty well. In particular, the fraternity piece, where we spent a lot of time talking about recruiting, and you can translate that in there. So for higher education, I think there's 3 or 4, and if you wanted more specifics, feel free to reach out to me. But that would be my advice: is pick 2 or 3 things that are in the family photo, if you will, of higher education.
Great, thanks for that, Dave. Getting a couple of questions here. First one that came in by Brother Graham Hess. By what criteria should recent graduates assess how much they're worth in order to negotiate salary?
I think you got to do your research. This isn't just a number where you say, you know what, that sounds good, or I would like to make that. Do your research, and it depends on the market that you're in. An example, New York pays a lot different than Columbus, Ohio. Miami, Florida pays a lot different than Seattle. So one, the area that you live in, do your research there as far as the economy, scales of economy related to that. And there's a lot of research in the Chamber of Commerce and online that you could do that. I would say you're networking. Hopefully you're talking to people that are in that field, and don't ask them what they make, but get an idea of somebody that's starting off in the field and what they should expect. And what's the criteria and range by, why on the low end and on the high end. Maybe it has to do with getting a master's degree. Maybe it has to do with having an internship. So know the nuances that help you demand or ask for a little bit more as you go through that. But I would say do your homework as far as talking to people in the field. Number 2, get an idea from local the local market, i.e. if you're in New York, what's the New York market versus the Chicago market? And there's a lot of public domains by which you can do that research on. I would say it's okay to ask too. It's okay to ask as you're going through the process and you're doing some education of yourself. ask a lot of questions to do that. I would not judge a position though just based upon the salary. I probably didn't mention this earlier, that how much money you make is important, but who you're working for, what you're doing, your job satisfaction, to me, is just as important or equally as important to how much you make. So make that evaluation as you're going through the salary of the other benefits of doing that job. Meaning, if you got to travel a lot, doesn't matter how much you pay. That's a cost associated with that, at least in my mind, as far as being away from your family. If you have to work long hours, and there's not a work-life balance, if it doesn't have the ability to work remotely, those are all things that you need to take into consideration, not just the number as well. And I would encourage you to do that in your research.
Hey, Dave, we got a couple more questions here before time's up. So Executive Director Rob Cadill, he asks, what industries do you expect to be hot in the next several months or year?
So I'll tell you the industries we're focused on. I mentioned the banks are strong. The banks were strong coming into this, and the banks are getting the funding as far as loans. So I would say anything in the banking or the financial industry. Two, there's been a lot of talk of, and I'm not just talking about the hospitals, but public health and the health field. There's a lot of learnings that's coming out of this, or what we're into as far as COVID-19. Research laboratories, various entities related to public health, not just the hospitals, public health. And interesting enough, government, short-term, government, there's a lot of government assistance that's going on. So actually having positions to work for the government in the short term, I think the question was short term, government type positions would be ones that'd be very interesting, especially ones that are related to looking at public health and looking into those types of things. I think those are the three things I would do. One other thing goes without mentioning, logistics and e-commerce. We've done a lot of research on this and this was something that was kind of hot going into that. On its surface, Amazon is an e-commerce company. You can make that argument. So that's a household name. But companies that make anything that they want to do direct to their customer is being more acceptable now than going to a store and buy it. Meaning, Smucker's Jelly is in Akron, Ohio, right down the road. My guess is their e-commerce is flying, probably up 3 or 4-fold right now, as far as consumers buying directly through them through e-commerce or different suppliers versus going to the store and buying your jelly. There's millions of examples of that as far as e-commerce. I would say that would be another area that I would look at.
Sorry.
You were consuming. I thought that was me. I got cut off. What else do we got?
Yeah, last question here from Brother Joe Pizzo. Someone who's seeking a new job in sales and account management, what's the best way to leverage and use the fraternity on LinkedIn? They're wondering if it's okay to post in private groups to look for a new career, or is that typically frowned upon?
You know, I wouldn't use the word typically anymore. Unprecedented times with COVID. So I think it's perfectly acceptable to demonstrate that you're looking for an opportunity on the market, especially if you're recently unemployed and you haven't been for some time. So if you've been in the field and over the last 12, 15 years, you have not been looking for a position and this is a first time deal, I would say definitely post that, because there's probably a lot of big fans that you've got out there that you don't realize. So unprecedented times. So advertising that you're looking right now, typically I wouldn't give that advice, but today I would. I think it's fine right now. I think the next 8-9 months, there's gonna be a lot of people in that boat. So hopefully I'm answering that question correctly as far as taking your job search public. Absolutely. From a networking standpoint, I'd be finite with that. I believe in one-on-one as far as if you're gonna ask for advice and counsel. I wouldn't do that in a public domain. And I think it's perfectly fine to send somebody a LinkedIn message versus email. I tend to use it like email and send them a message. And in fact, if somebody links in and sends me a LinkedIn note, I get less of those than I do email. That may stick out more for me, at least me personally. And so if there's somebody that you maybe are don't have a relationship with, and that you would like to seek advice or counsel, but you're on LinkedIn with them, you've linked up together, but you really haven't talked, send them a LinkedIn note and ask them for some time, over the next few weeks. Now, keep in mind that there's a lot going on, so somebody may not get back to you right away. But feel free to reach out to them on LinkedIn on a private note. And I would say my answer would vary than if you had asked me 2 months ago. I think it's okay to go public with your search right now, especially if you've been gainfully employed for some time.
Great. Well, that's all we have time for.
All right, brothers, I appreciate it. Happy Founders Day. And for all of those of you, I'm assuming that you're on this, good luck with your job search. And I appreciate your time today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Pergay.